Welcome to Cameron's Conversations podcast. So, in this week, I thought I would talk a little bit about what I consider to be quite an important topic, given that more than half my clients are female. Is fat loss harder for females? Yes. Thank you for coming to this podcast. Hope you enjoyed, and hopefully you got the take-home message from that one. So that's good. That was that. So, joking aside, I think it's worth talking about, right? It is by and large harder for females for the simple reason that your kind of amount of calories you're on tends to sit lower. Now, it's particularly hard for smaller females because one of the things that kind of comes up, and I think I kind of mentioned this in the a kind of aggressive weight loss podcast that I kind of did just a short while ago, is that this idea of, if you are on lower calories, you're a bit more restricted, blah, blah, blah. It's just a little bit harder. You can't have a ton of flexibility. You're not going to be able to have 3 meals out a week. Now, if you are sat on 12 to 1300 calories, it is undoubtedly harder to fit some of these things in. So going out for a few drinks and going out for a meal, well, that is going to be a big ask, right? If you're on 1300 or 1200 calories. Now, I want to quickly caveat this actually, because this is something that pees me off quite a lot with the industry right now, and what sounds positive but isn't, this whole thing of you should never be on 1200 calories, right? That might be true of me. I'm never going to need to diet on 1200 calories. I am a just under 6 foot male who exercises a lot, who has a really pretty healthy step count, and again, goes to the gym quite a bit, has a decent amount of muscle mass, right? If I am a 4'10" female who is not very active at all, average steps, we're starting at 2000 and maybe up some to 3, 4, 5, that, and goes to the gym a couple of times a week, your calories are going to be quite low. And it would be really deceptive, actually. I think it is a little bit deceptive to say that they wouldn't be. And I think this is the problem sometimes, because I've had a client recently come from a coach who was trying to diet them on the highest possible calories, which sounds really good, and they made zero progress. And I looked at the calories she was dieting on, and she was dieting on not far off the calories that I'm dieting on right now, and weighs 20 kilos less than me, and is female, and is much shorter than me as well. And I was just thinking, crikey, that's really optimistic, and it's just not practical, right? So I think this is really important, that whole thing about, you should never be on X amount of calories. It's very specific to the client. If someone is really, really short and they don't weigh much in the first place, I'm sorry, but your calories are lower. In the same way that if someone's really tall and they're quite heavy, often it's not, the calories don't need to be that low either. So those two things are quite important to remember as well. Your size, your height, your activity levels is a third thing, all matter hugely. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that point. But back to the kind of actual focus of this podcast around, this idea of if you are on 1300 calories, 1200 calories, you do not have a massive amount of wiggle room. That is not to say that you can never go for a meal out. That isn't true. And it's not to say you can never have a drink. However, it is absolutely harder for female clients on average, because your calories do have to be that little bit lower, right? They do have to be that little bit lower. And if you are lucky to be relatively tall, this doesn't impact you in the same way. But if you are a relatively small female, it definitely does. And flexibility is going to be limited. As I say, you are going to be able to fit some things in, but it's just a bit trickier to do. Now, in an ideal world, what you kind of would like to do is maybe have a little bit more flexibility and still make progress and so on and so forth. However, sometimes we just have to be practical about it. It's and I have had clients who are really small, not super active, and don't have a ton of weight to lose necessarily, or quite lean and are on quite low calories. And it's just hard for us to fit a lot in there, right? We have to be really, really selective about if we're taking extra calories in. Someone having, for example, liquid calories, if someone's having, let's say, they're going to Starbucks and they're having their favorite drink that's 180 calories. Now, normally for a client, I might say, as long as, because I always talk about trade-offs, and you'll have heard me talk about this maybe on Instagram and the podcast before, it's trade-offs are important. You need to figure what's important. For me, I'm not a big drinker, so I can be slightly more flexible perhaps than the average person can be with the food choices, because I don't trade it off there, right? If someone has 4 or 5 drinks a week, well, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, actually that's, I'm not doing that in general, right? It's not to say I never drink, but I'm probably saving a chunk of calories there, right? Which I can spend on other things, maybe a bigger dinner, or, whatever it is, like a meal out, something like that. That works for me. That's my preference, right? I would rather not drink in a weight loss phase because it suits me to do so. I think this is really important, is being clear in the trade-offs can really, really help here, but it's even harder as a smaller female because the trade-offs are kind of more limited, right? Like if you have 3 or 4 meals out in a week, that's a hard ask. It is a hard ask. It is definitely tougher. Whereas someone on higher calories can probably still do a few pretty low calorie days and then give themselves some flex because they can bank more calories. Because if I'm on 2,000 calories as I am right now for dieting, I can potentially bank 500 calories in a day. I mean, that's 1,500 calories for me is still pretty low. That probably sounds a lot to some people, but it's relative to kind of your activity, your height, etc., as I've said. So for me, that would be really pushing. I'd probably be feeling a bit more hungry and a bit more tired from that. So if I did that, I could say 500 calories, and if I'm on 2,000, it means on a Friday night I could have 2,500 calories, right? That's quite a lot of food. That's pretty easy to fit a kind of meal out into. If you are a smaller female on 1,300 calories, yeah, you might be able to bank 200, maybe 300 at a push, but that's probably going to be it. And even then, when you get to that meal, you're probably only going to have 1,600 calories. So it is undoubtedly the case that it is a little bit harder for females, right? And as I say, predominantly, actually, my client base, I think I said it was like more than 50%. It's definitely higher than that. Predominantly, my client base is female, though I have, a good percentage of guys as well who are all smashing it too. But this is pretty normal in this kind of industry, is that it tends to be at like 70-30. And I think actually my numbers are like 65-35, something like that. But one of the things I say is, like, especially because I have a few clients who I train, both like husband and wife or the partner, etc., boyfriend, girlfriend, like in those instances, where someone's got like a male partner who's taller and heavier, sometimes it can get quite annoyed at like, oh, he's eating so many more calories and he's dropping weight even faster than me. And I'm like, absolutely he will, because the height side of it makes it easier. The fact he's not on such low calories makes it easier. The problem with that is that you can then get a bit frustrated and annoyed, but you have to just be pragmatic. It's the cards you dealt, right? Like that is, it sounds a bit blunt, and it's really easy for me to say this as a 30-year-old male, right, who's quite active. Great, thanks, Cameron, that's kind of you. But then it's also pragmatic, right? Like there's no point of us beating around the bush and saying, well, it's fine, don't worry about it, we'll just eat 2,000 calories, like that client I kind of mentioned earlier, who came to me and had been with a previous coach, had been on such a high amount of calories that she made no progress. And you're paying for coaching for 4 months and getting nowhere, and was always kind of pushed to keep calories as high as you can, keep calories that you don't want to drop too much. You'll go into starvation mode, which is utter nonsense. Like there's a reason that people in countries where they don't have enough food are starving. It's pretty simple. If you don't have enough calories, you lose weight. Like yes, there's a tiny bit of kind of metabolic adaptation that occurs, not a tiny bit, but a little bit of metabolic adaptation that occurs so that people like their bodies do expend slightly less calories, but it definitely isn't starvation mode, and it is normal. It's a normal part of dieting. It definitely doesn't stop you losing weight. It's just utter nonsense. So it's really good to have this context. So in a way, this is a kind of funny podcast because it's kind of me saying, look, yes, it is harder. Like that's the obvious part as I joked at the start. But I want to talk a little bit about why it's harder. And I do think it's very much harder for smaller females because they don't have as much flexibility. They almost can't get away with as much. That's where actually being quite active can be a useful tool in your toolbox. It has a impact. It's still limited. It doesn't compensate for entirely, but you don't want to stack the odds against you. If you're someone who's 5'0" and you're doing 1,000 steps a day, well, you're kind of stacking the odds against yourself, right? That's probably not a sensible place to be trying to diet from. It would make much more sense for you to say, hey, I'm going to make a real push to get my steps up, my activity up, so I can diet on a more tolerable amount of calories as well, and have a little bit more flexibility. But I think when you kind of look at the banking of calories, that's where you see the impact. So this is where you have to take a pinch of salt when, and I suppose I can include myself in this, although I try to be very transparent about this. It's where you talk about, like, you see male coaches who lose weight and it seems really, really easy, and they've dropped all this weight and they're like 6 foot plus and 100 and something kilos and a good amount of muscle mass and training 6 times a week. Like that isn't necessarily comparable, right? The reason I'm so successful with coaching a lot of clients who are small and female, as well as everyone else, right? But like in that specific group as well, the reason I'm so successful at coaching that group of people is because I get it. Like I know the reality is it's not that easy. That doesn't mean it's not doable. And I've had so many clients get into amazing shape. And hey, you know what? Your maintenance calories are often better than you think, because if you start exercising a good bit and we get a good amount of steps in, it's often less less challenging at maintenance, certainly, than it is a weight loss phase by far. Like, they settle in, and your hunger tends to be somewhat in line with your kind of the amount of calories you need. But, obviously we always want a little bit more than we need. That's normal. But I think it's really, really good context. And I do think, like I kind of made that reference to that, like, for someone, if they said, oh, Cameron, I love having that coffee, it just makes my day, it's the highlight of my day to have that. That's a really tough one for someone who might be on 1,200 calories, where it might be like, yeah, you know what, you can have it, but you're probably going to have it less often. Whereas for someone else, they might think 150 calories, if that's the trade-off I have to make to have that coffee or whatever it is, you can tell I'm not a coffee drinker, but that thing from Starbucks that I absolutely love, that might be a worthwhile trade-offs. Unfortunately, if you're a smaller female, the trade-offs are slightly harsher. So I think that's a good bit of context. But also, if you are looking at your other half right now, and you are female on relatively low calories and they're dropping weight quicker than you, then A, you shouldn't feel bad about it, and B, you have every right to feel just a tiny bit resentful, because the odds are slightly stacked against you in that sense. Doesn't mean you can't lose weight. I work with tons of clients, as I say, who bloody well smash it, but it's really, really good context that, yeah, do you know what? It is a little bit harder. It absolutely is. And anyone who says otherwise is kidding you on, right? They absolutely are, and they don't get it, because it is tougher. When you do the maths, it makes a ton of sense. Anyway, if you are a small female or not a small female, or just in general struggling with your weight loss, and you feel like you need a bit of accountability to kick you on, and you want to get some seriously in-depth coaching that actually gets you in a better place with your relationship with food, as well as into much, much better shape ahead of the summer months. Somewhere it's February, so those months are swinging around pretty soon, then I'm going to put the note for in the show notes for one-to-one coaching, and you can just click on that and you can book a call and we can have a little bit of a chat. I am very, very relaxed, so we will have a little bit of a chat about whether it's the best fit for you. And if I don't think it's the best fit for you, I will recommend you or refer you elsewhere to the person that I think is the best fit. And if we do feel like we're a really good fit and we can make some serious progress, then we can take it from there. Hope you're having a great week, and I'll speak to you soon.